Those of you who have joined us through the miracle of Zoom and through the virtual plane, I welcome you to the Thomas Morris Chester Welcome Center and Research Collection, an extension of the new, the renovated McCormick Public Library, which is right on the riverfront at the corner of what on the maps say is Walnut and Front Street, but what has been renamed Thomas Morris Chester Way. And this corner connects the river through the Chester Way to the monument on the 15th and 19th Amendment and the first full-size bronze monument of Thomas Morris Chester, claimed by Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and claimed by London and Ireland, claimed by New Orleans and St. Louis as a first voice in leadership, in literacy, and in justice and rights for all. I'm joined by our colleagues and friends of our community. We are in program 6 of our 8-part series here with our colleagues, the Dauphin County Library System. And tonight we're going to explore that concept that I had, folks, about my childhood. In my childhood, so man, I was a comic book freak, you know, and I, but particularly Superman. But what I really wanted to be, Susan, was the announcer on Superman, the guy who said, you know, defender of truth, justice, and the American way. And that used to always confuse me because as a Boy Scout, I thought that truth and justice were the American way. And I was wondering, what is this conjunction and? You know what, I have spent now more than 60 years trying to get across the bridge from truth and justice to the full American way, the full dream. And I thought we would start back to back this evening with our first guest, Adrienne Whaley, who is from Philadelphia and is dealing with the Museum of the American Revolution and working to create that bridge for us about how the American Revolution Museum fits into the controversies and the intensity event of our lives today against the landscape of DEI and those documents which the founders signed, making sense to us and making history make sense. Hey, welcome. So welcome, Adrienne. I was able to be with Adrienne in Philadelphia in February of 2020. We started our project called the Francis Project, the Francis Ellen Watkins Harper Project. And we convened over 40 organizations and about 150 individuals who across a 5-year period had done programs about Francis Ellen Watkins Harper. Adrienne was part of the program that our Francis Project supported in Philadelphia at the Constitution Center. And it was the very last live performance I saw because the week later was March 13th and shut the world down. But they brought a very brilliant piece about Francis Harper to life using contemporary artists, historical interpreters, and first-person documents. And so I thought we should start this evening's conversation about truth, justice, and the American way by looking through her lens at the American Revolution. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Uh, could you tell us first about the work that you do and the institution?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to very quickly share my screen just to give you all a general sense of who my organization is and what we are up to. So, let's see. I'm assuming you all can see this, and let's do just a quick from the beginning. So, I work at the Museum of the American Revolution, which is downtown Philadelphia at 3rd and Chestnut Streets. So, right in the historic heart of Old City, Philadelphia, just a couple of blocks from Independence Hall or the old Pennsylvania State House, a block away from Carpenter's Hall, where the First Continental Congress met, just down the street and around the corner from the Liberty Bell, and close to our friends at the National Constitution Center, and close to Elfress Alley and the Betsy Ross House and all of that. But if you have never seen us, or heard of us before, that's still okay, because we are still a pretty much brand new institution. We just opened in April of 2017. So we are so very, very new. And just to give you a sense of who we are, our mission is to uncover and share compelling stories about the diverse people and the complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiments in liberty, equality, and self-government. And I am very privileged
That's
to get
really,
to work. Oh, go ahead.
would you say that again?
Yes.
Our
This is why I
guests
have it
both,
memorized.
our guests both live and know, and on the Zoom know that I have this concept called the Great Galactical Blackboard, a galaxy like board that should shine. And that definition should go up this evening on the
Oh,
Great
yes. All
Galactical
right, let's put it up
Blackboard.
there. Let's put it on the blackboard. Our mission is to uncover and share compelling stories, because the storytelling is really important to us, right? So compelling stories about the diverse people and the complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiments in liberty, equality, and self-government. So I'm going to lift up a couple of other things in there, right? So diverse people. There are over 2.5 million people living in British North America on the eve of the American Revolution. And while people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were important figures in this story, not all of those 2.5 million people were those three men. So we got to tell the stories of the 1 out of every 5 people who at that point in time was a person of African descent. We have to tell the stories of the diverse Native Americans who are living on this land and contributing things and having experiences in this moment. We have to talk about the women and the children and the folks who were laborers and artisans and all of those folks. So those are the diverse people. And then we have to talk about the complex events, because a lot of people see and have been taught that the revolution is just like black and white, good versus evil. There were a whole lot of reasonable reasons to be in every space that people held politically and socially during that point in time. And if we can't teach people how to see the complexities of that moment, how can we ever expect that they will understand and willingly engage with the complexities of the moment that we live in right now, or anything that happened in between?
So let me ask you a couple of questions on behalf
Yeah.
of my colleagues and friends. Uncover and share. Would you break that down? We are adapting, adopting, and mining the conversation about Thomas Morris Chester's way of the quest for freedom. And we're also trying to find documents, primary and secondary. And that's the collection's role. The Welcome Center's role is to share those things. And we're still kind of talking about how a library, which is an introspective place, begins to create and share. So could you talk about how you all approach those two?
Yeah, well, let's see. What if we start with uncover? So I actually wish now that I'd put another slide in here to talk about one of the past exhibits that we did called When Women Lost the Vote, which you'll remember that we talked about before in relation to
Right.
the Francis Project. So a couple of years ago in 2020, actually, so to celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment, we put together an exhibit that focused on a moment in American history and in particular New Jersey history when women and free people of African descent had the right to vote for about 31 years, from 1776 to 1807. So well over a century before the 19th Amendment was passed. And the research that our team did, including the lead curator for that, Marcella Macucci, they were able to uncover 18 poll lists from New Jersey, half of which had the names of women and free people of African descent who had actually voted in New Jersey.
That is
And so
amazing.
we took that information and we sprinkled it throughout our core galleries, and then we built an online exhibit to tell those stories, including interactive versions of the very poll list where those women and those men's names appeared. So that anywhere that you are in the nation or the world, you can click through and find out what some of these elections were about, how different people were sharing their opinions about it, whether or not women were voting in family groupings or with their church or things like that, stories about the men of color who were voting. So we wanted it to be accessible and we wanted people to see those primary source documents because we knew that we would eventually have to give a lot of that stuff back. So that's for that exhibit. But
So thank you for this teachable moment, because we have always started our story with 1838, with the
mm,
loss of the vote by the changing of the Pennsylvania Constitution.
mhm,
African American who owned land could vote until 1838 when the Constitution was changed. But you're
mhm,
telling us that a movement even before that, we keep talking, Adrienne, about the rise and the fall of the franchise and how
mhm.
fragile the franchise is. So
Yes.
thank you for this teachable moment.
That's exactly why we called that exhibit When Women Lost the Vote. We knew that so many people would be in a very celebratory moment about women gaining the vote, but we have to remember that that is something that has come and gone in the past. And that should be instructive for us in the present, because we need to make sure that if we believe that voting is a right for all Americans, then we have to ensure that that is protected for all Americans, because it has gone away in the past. We have to be vigilant. But I'm so glad that you brought up 1838, because you know that we just opened a brand new exhibit called Black Founders, the Fortin Family of Philadelphia. And this explores the story of James Fortin and his amazing, amazing family, 3 generations that we're covering and then some, and talking about these folks who were fighting for abolition, for the anti-slavery moment, who were fighting for the franchise, both for people of African descent and for women. And we're doing so much more, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War and beyond. So that's another way that we are sort of jumping into these stories and finding ways to engage people, pull them into the story, and hopefully help them to make connections to the present day. We've met with Fortin family descendants who there are branches in that family that had never known about each other and never met each other until we pulled them together for our exhibit opening. And the materials that we have in this exhibit, a Fortin family Bible that has been passed down through the generations since sometime in the early to mid 1800s. We've got samplers that Fortin's daughters were sewing. We've got a piece of furniture from James Fortin's household. We have his first ever written reference when he was a prisoner of war because he was sailing on a privateer ship and was captured by the British and put on the prison ship Jersey. We have the list of prisoners that shows his name. First time it's been back in the United States since like 1783.
Now, this is
So,
very, very exciting for us to hear that we're on the right track. We have a group of historians, scholars, humanists, whom we lovingly call the history detectives. And we've
love that.
invited 100 families who lived in our 8th Ward from 1838 to 1920 to share their documents and scan them. But a lot of times the families, Adrienne, don't know what the thing is. this is something that grandma gave me and I told Nana I would keep it. So it's
And
in the
this is why we
Bible and,
have
you
to
know, I
work
don't really,
together.
yeah.
Yes.
And so our history detectives are working to contextualize these documents and scan them. And we've been working with the state archives to help the families in a simple managing archival materials, how
I
to
love
handle them,
that.
how to store them.
That work is so powerful. People just don't know what families have that they have been treasuring for years, and they might not even know the full story of these things. But if family historians and public historians and academic historians can work together, if we can value the work that each other is doing, we can move mountains. And isn't that the purpose of everything that we're doing, is to change public conversation and to teach people about the richness of all of our stories. It's all American history.
Now, I know, of course, about this incredible Fortin family, but they're living at a time when women and daughters were listed after their father's names in the census and the tax documents. So would you share, this is Women's History Month, some of these incredible family members of the Fortin?
Absolutely. So yeah, most people who know about the Fortin family, really what they know about is James Fortin. And I mean, he was a fascinating figure. And so this is for good reason, right? He serves on a privateership. He does all sorts of things in business, et cetera, et cetera. But he marries a woman named Charlotte Van Dyne, who, along with several of their daughters, founds the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. So right there off the bat, this isn't James Fortin's family. This is James and Charlotte's family. Neither one of them is taking a backseat to ensuring that their family is fighting for social change, fighting to make the words of the Declaration of Independence true for all Philadelphians, all Pennsylvanians, all Americans, right? You've got the daughters who were actively involved in education and abolition and anti-slavery movements, who were deeply involved in their churches and the larger religious community in Philadelphia. So they're doing all of this work. They're marrying men who were also involved in this, which just doubles the power that they're able to have, and just quadruples it for their family. And then you even look at the grandchildren, and you've got somebody like Charlotte L. Fortin, who is an educator who goes down to the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina to help to teach the newly freed people who have been emancipated by the Union soldiers during the Civil War. She keeps a diary of her experiences down there, and at least 5 of those volumes still exist. We have one of them on display in the museum right now, where she talks about meeting the United States Colored Troops 54th Regiment. And it's just the work that this family is doing. They are all in their own individual ways using the strengths, the education, the skills, the passions that they have, working to make sure that this nation lives into its ideals. And if anyone is in Philadelphia or near Philadelphia and you want to dig more deeply into some of their stories, plus stories of the women in the Douglas family, as well as the associated Grimke family, we're actually doing a program next Friday where historian Dr. Carrie Greenidge, who just wrote a biography about the Grimke women, she is going to be speaking at the museum. I'm going to be interviewing her, and it's going to be part of an entire Women's History Month tied to the story of the women of the Fortin family. So that's going
Now,
to be next Friday evening.
I do want to make the footnote. By the way, this is salon style. This is, so please have refreshments. Those of you who are watching, don't forget to go out to the kitchen and get your snacks. We made this connection with Thomas Morris Chester because Thomas Morris Chester was a recruiter for the 54th Massachusetts. He began to recruit. Massachusetts actually began to accept African Americans soldiers marked as early as April of 1863. So he was recruiting, and we have an event here that we did, which was a June 30th event, where he marched 200 recruits from the Bethel AME Church in our old 8th Ward, which is now, we think, under the Capitol East Annex. He marched through the Pennsylvania Railroad and took them to Massachusetts. So
I love it. I love it. The connections are everywhere. T. Morris Chester, he would have known the Fortin sons. right? Like they would have been part of a network and a community that was communicating with one another across the state into New York and Massachusetts and down south and so on and so forth. It's all a community. And it's so fascinating to think about it.
Continue with this currency of people of color at the time of the revolution, and also the roles that they played, which are significant as stitches in the flag, as part of the tapestry of American culture.
Yes, yes. So you all heard me say that about 500,000 people in British North America on the eve of the Revolution were people of African descent. Now, most of them were enslaved, but some of them were free, and all of them were having vastly different kinds of experiences, depending on where they lived, what communities they were part of, and who was around them, the various skills that they had. And you see them getting involved in the revolution in any number of ways, whether they were enlisting as soldiers or being recruited as such, for example, with the Rhode Island Regiment, which helped people transition from enslavement to freedom. You have people like Phyllis Wheatley, who are taking this opportunity to write their way to freedom, essentially. She is writing about the hypocrisy of slavery as it's being discussed by revolutionaries. And at the same time, she's celebrating George Washington for his work to sort of liberate and emancipate the American colonies. There's complexity there. You've got people like, Elizabeth Freeman, who up in Massachusetts sues for her freedom and wins. Right? You've got people who are freedom seekers who are joining the British Army, right? Or running to behind the British lines, because for them, that seems like it's going to be the best chance at freedom. You've got folks who were involved in writing petitions up in Massachusetts. You've got a number of people of African descent who in 1773 and 1774 are petitioning both the revolutionary government and the royal government to try to get their freedom. You've got folks who are helping to make supplies for the army. You've got people who are serving as educators during the Revolutionary War as people of African descent. They're in every room. They are doing everything that we can think about. And it is impossible for us to understand the story of the American Revolution without understanding their stories, especially given that the discussion is so much about liberty and freedom.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Move us forward in your presentation to the work that you're presently doing and the diverse communities and conversations that are coming forward as we.
Absolutely. So I knew that you were interested in thinking about how are we making the past relevant. And so I pulled just a couple of examples of what we do here at the museum. So I'm in charge of education and community engagement here at the Museum of the American Revolution. And that means that we have family programs under my purview. It means that we've got school and teacher programs, including professional development. And let me tell you all, teachers are hungry for the sorts of stories that we are telling. We are in a moment where teachers are looking for deeper and more complex and more diverse stories about the American Revolution. And so we're excited to be able to offer professional developments to help them to get those stories into their classrooms. We also do a lot of gallery interpretation, costumed interpretation, theatrical performances, tableau talks and tours and discovery carts and all sorts of interactions with real and replica artifacts, all sorts of things like that. But what you all can see on the screen, number one, on the left-hand side, are some students who are taking a tour in our galleries. And actually, this is really cool because we've got a number of built environments in our core exhibit so that you kind of feel like you're in a place where things actually happened in the 18th century. We're brand new construction. We're not in a historical building. So we have to make these things ourselves. And you can see these young people are actually touching a real piece of a Liberty Tree, which is a space where sons and daughters of liberty gathered to plan protests and to stage protests during the revolution. And we use this as a space to talk about some of the big ideals of the revolution, what they meant then, what they mean now, right? And we get them thinking about how propaganda is used, what does protest look like in the past and present, and so on and so forth. We get into really, really rich conversations with our young people on these tours. But on oh, go ahead.
May I ask you a question? We are sitting on the eve of St. Patrick's Day. And the African American and Irish diaspora network is exploring, which is a international organization of Afro-Gaelic relationships, is exploring the notion of rioting and poor people being set against each other for another capital purpose. So could you help us with your definitions or your framing the difference between protests of this period, which were many, and riots, which were equally burning down whole communities? And so
Yeah.
how does the museum handle the distinction between protests, which is our right, and rioting, which is not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We actually have some new language in our gallery to talk about that. And I wish I could remember exactly what it says off the top of my head. But I think what we have to understand is that both protest and rioting are in some ways a political language, right? And so sometimes the more expressive we are in our language, the less we have felt like we were being heard in other ways, right? The angrier we are, the more pent up feelings are, the less controlled people are sometimes. Now, sometimes people are just taking advantage of opportunities, right? But oftentimes when you see public protests taking place, and they happen frequently during the colonial and revolutionary eras, not just in the colonies, but also over in Great Britain and in other places as well. All of this has messages that it's meant to convey, right? Whether it is about taxation, whether it is about political representation, whether it is about jobs and other opportunities, and so on and so forth. And so I think what we try to get people to think about is, for themselves, what do you think the difference is between these things, and who gets to decide where the line is between protests, which we might consider to be legitimate possibly, and rioting, which we might consider to be illegitimate? Who gets to make those determinations? How do we understand the role that power plays in all of that? And if we're making determinations about the past, are we then using the same understandings when we look at the present day? Or is there a moment when we start to make distinctions and flip our understanding? Another area where we think about this is when you first walk into our galleries, you're greeted by a film that shows the tearing down of the statue of King George III after the Declaration of Independence is read for the first time in New York City. And you return to that with an actual sort of tableau statue in the gallery that we have that talks about the Declaration of Independence. Now, there are some people who, when we look back and think about the removal of Confederate statues recently, there were folks who have lots of opinions about that, right? And who maybe feel like it's inappropriate to be removing those statues. Well, it's an interesting conversation then to have with folks about whether or not they also think that the down of the statue of King George III was appropriate, right? When do we get to decide who defines the meaning of a statue? Who gets to assign worth to these public symbols, and who is in the position of power to say what is right and what is wrong? Whose voices do we listen to when we think about the injustice of symbols that are in the public? And so we've had some fascinating conversations around that.
Our contemporary media is having that debate / tug of war over the distinctions between the summer of Black Lives Matter and the January 6th. What is a protest? What is a riot? And it would be interesting if we could to look through those two events at the revolution, and where people fell.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's important to think about what are the different outlets that people have to express themselves. And we have to think about, do they truly have access to the things that we say that everybody has access to? And I think that those are just a couple of the questions that we should be thinking about as we try to understand the function of a variety of different kinds of protests that exist in the public sphere.
Here's a question that or may not make sense. As you present the same core content to young people and students and older citizens, what's the difference in their response and the
Mm,
questions that they ask as they look at the same history?
yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I think maybe the biggest difference is that a lot of the young people are coming. I mean, many of them are coming in with their families, but a lot of them are coming as school groups, and they're getting access to these stories when they're in between like fourth and 12th grade as they visit us. For a lot of the older folks who are coming to visit us, they're asking questions like, why didn't I learn this in school?
This is, yes.
Mhm. Yeah. So there's a difference in what was taught in the past and what is being taught right now. And I mean, I think we're still in the midst of growing pains, right? Like we're seeing that right now in the public sphere. But diverse stories and more complicated stories that move away from the heroes and villains version of the American Revolution, that is more and more getting developed within school and classroom curricula. And none of it is to the purpose of destroying the ideals of the American Revolution. We can't forget how radical it was. We can't forget the major strides forward that were enabled by the American Revolution. But the complexity of it helps more people to see themselves in the story, to better understand the fullness of the story and what actually happened, right? And it allows us to better understand the rest of our American history. And so people are still figuring out what that looks like, but many more of our young people are getting that now. And I think a lot of the older visitors that we get wonder why they didn't get it. And sometimes they're upset that they didn't get it. And they're sometimes figuring out how to sort of adapt it within the mental frameworks that they've already had. But frankly, the biggest reaction that we get from everybody is excitement over the story, right? They're so happy to see so many elements of the story, and then to hear from our educators, oh yeah, you're interested in this piece, you should check out this historic site, or you should check out this other museum, because we truly believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so if people come to us for the overarching story, then we can point them to so many other community and national resources that are going to dig even more deeply into them.
Now, Adrienne and friends, I asked this question uh, because we need to know, with states changing the history about teaching BIPOC and diversity, with books being banned and library boards being concerned about what their relevance should be and what their responsibility is. You have worked very hard to articulate a narrative and a point of view inside the four walls of your museum. But how does the changing politics and landscape of the kaleidoscope of events, in your mission, you said conflicting, how does the conflict beyond your four walls change your, the picture of what people see and the challenge that they bring in with either
Yeah,
vision or blindness?
yeah, this is a really good question. What I can say is that we are still a new institution. We opened in 2017. And so we essentially opened like in the midst of a presidential election, right? And like a big one at that. And so people have had all sorts of big feelings around our American identity since even before we opened our doors, when we were just introducing ourselves to people, but didn't have the physical space to invite them into, right? And so what we have seen is that, excitingly, people on both sides of the current partisan political divide have seen and experienced things in our institution that they found to be uplifting and that they found to be engaging. And it's not that we're telling a different story to the different visitors who come in, they're all getting the same big story as they go through our spaces. But because we're weaving in the complexities along with some of the amazing positive pieces of the revolution, right? And all of that is complex. people are able to feel both inspired and challenged. And that's what we're going for, right? If only one side of the political divide felt like they were being represented, then we're probably actually doing something wrong, because there are important stories and important voices and perspectives and opinions that we do need to hear being represented from a number of different kinds of people. We truly believe that the story of the American Revolution can be both uplifting and challenging at the same time. And so that's what we have been trying to offer. And I mean, we're seeing the positive impact of that. So for example, we talk about slavery. We talk about challenges when it comes to the Native American communities that had to make difficult decisions. And yet we are able to work with USIS in order to hold naturalization ceremonies in our institution. Like you can see the image in the upper right-hand corner. And we hold citizenship classes where we teach people the basic facts that they need to know to pass the United States citizenship test using the resources that are in our galleries. Right. So there's something really powerful there about the ideals, as well as the ways in which we are still working and striving to try to meet those ideals.
So you're keeping this from being a sepia tone experience. You know, how do you work to keep what I refer to as the musties and the dusties of history so that it's relevant?
Yeah, goodness, we're doing a million things at the institution. The naturalization ceremonies and the citizenship programs and all of that are a piece of it. The school programs are a piece of it. We do book talks and we have author discussions and presentations. We have family programs. One of the things I was super excited about last summer is that we were funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services to take our family programs out into a bunch of different community libraries all around the city of Philadelphia in partnership with the Free Library of Philadelphia. We delivered programs at their locations and then arranged transportation for them to come to the museum for free, all of it for free, to be able to take a family tour, to see our hands-on discovery center, to explore the museum on their own. And we created, I wish I had an example of it right next to me, but we created a family guide for this Revolution at the Library program, where the front side of it had stories that specifically related to the American Revolution in each of the neighborhoods where we visited a library, so that when kids and their adults could look at this family guide, they could see, I know that name, I recognize that intersection. This thing happened in my backyard. Yes, the revolution is everywhere and it connects to your neighborhood, even if you're not in Old City.
We're going to put the revolution is everywhere up on the galactical blackboard also.
There you go. The revolution is everywhere, everywhere. Yes. And I think one of our other most exciting programs falls under the umbrella of our African American interpretive program. So if you've ever been to a site about the American Revolution, you have probably noticed that there aren't that many people who are in costume who are people of African descent. That's a problem. And we want to change that because, again, 1 out of every 5 people living in British North America at that point in time was a person of African descent. So why don't we see them? Part of it is the pipeline. And so one of the things that we have started doing is a Living History Youth Summer Institute. We piloted it last year with 5 students. You can see them in the picture in the lower right-hand corner. And what it's meant to do is to teach young people of African descent between the ages of 15 and 21 what it means to do costumed interpretation, but also what it means to work in a museum, whether you're interested in education, whether you're interested in curation, whether you're interested in accounting or development or any of the other departments that exist in this business. And then we had them do some research on people of African descent who were living during the American Revolution, whether it's someone like Peter Salem or Salem Poor, Lemuel Haynes, James Forten, Phyllis Wheatley, and so on and so forth. And then we got them into 18th century clothing. And we took them out for this example, for their final program, we took them out to Clark Park. And we have a replica of George Washington sleeping in an office tent. And we work with them to erect the tent in the middle of this busy park in Southwest Philadelphia. And then we worked with them to interpret the story of George Washington's diverse military family. They were paid for this program, so it was a summer job for them. It was an educational experience where they could learn about different careers, and it also exposed them to history, and in particular, the stories of people who looked like them in the past. So we've actually been funded by Comcast NBC Universal to do it again this summer. So actually, if you all know any young people between 15 and 21 who were in or around Philadelphia and they're looking for a summer job and like history, the application closes at the end of this month. So all that information is up on our website.
Thank you for coming. This was our attempt with the Young Irish family last summer at Madame Owine. Just as we got them to the point where they were about to go into costume, they were a military family, and their father was transferred to Florida. But that was an attempt. We'd love to talk to you more about that. But
Absolutely.
you talked about being seen. So let me ask you an honest question.
And I'm going to make myself seen. I'm going to stop sharing so you all can fully see me.
I get goosebumps when I open the door of your museum and walk in and see an African-American woman as the director of education. What have you discovered about yourself and your place in the revolution? And how has the institution informed your personal quest for freedom?
Ooh, that is a really good question. Let's see. So I've always loved, or at least for a very long time, I have known that I was in love with history. I majored in African American studies. I'm also a genealogist, and I've been doing that research since like 2002. So I've always had that love. One of the things that I appreciate about working here is because we're working with, even though we talk about the ongoing revolution and how we today still fit into that story, the core of the story that we're talking about is really about a 30-year time frame from like the 1760s to the 1790s. And because that time frame is so narrow, you're able to go very, very deep. And that's something that I love. I love the depth of storytelling and the depth of research and the way in which we're able to world build around all of that. I think that that's been such a wonderful experience, especially for me, because my background was actually in 19th century history as opposed to 18th century. So number one, shout out to the African American Museum in Philadelphia, because the entry point for me into the 18th century was their core exhibition, Audacious Freedom, which looks at African American Philadelphians from 1776 to 1876. So that was like my primer before I started working at this institution. And I've been loving that experience. I think probably, you know, speaking about myself as a woman of African descent, one of the things that I have had to really learn about myself or continue to practice and to deepen is my patience, I think, because my institution and my colleagues are amazing, but not everybody who is excited about the story of the American Revolution, whether they say it outright or not, fully believes in the place of people of African descent or people of color or women or so on and so forth in that story. It is still very much a founding fathers story. And so I've definitely had to find ways of working on my patience to make sure that and this is an educational thing, right? As educators, we have to meet everybody where they are. And we have to practice that patience. We have to sort of see where they are, what they're working with, and then scaffold as we try to pull them along on this journey that we are hoping that they will go on with us. So that's probably the thing that has been sort of not outside of my wheelhouse, because hopefully that is always a thing I practiced as patience, but it's something that I'm more aware of because not everybody necessarily wants to share that with you.
So scaffolding is a concept. We have about 15 questions in our chat room or some comments. Let us take some questions or some comments, both from those that are in the chat room and those who are here with us in the salon.
Let's do it.
I'll ask Ashley if she'll select some. Yes, ma'am. Great. Great. Now, are there questions in the room or comments or Mark?
Thank you. I have a question about the students. standards so that it's just that would help also pass the standardized test.
That's a very good question. Did you hear that?
I did not. You'll have to repeat it.
The question was in your education program, as you develop your lesson plan, do those lesson plans align with standards so that teachers can use their visitors in service and or take those tools into the
They
classroom?
absolutely do. Yes, yeah. So in particular, we've been
Was
aligning.
that close? Yeah.
In particular, we've been aligning our resources to Pennsylvania standards, and we've also been aligning them to the Public History Initiative standards that came out from UCLA. We're probably going to be turning more to the C3 standards. It seems like the National Council for the Social Studies is leaning on those a little bit more, but a lot of the standards, whether they're at the state level, whether they're something like a Public History Initiative or C3, they're also still tying in Common Core things. And so we just try to make sure that we're connecting to all of that as we create our resources. And we've got a bunch of them online if you go to the for students and teachers area of our website.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, this is great. I have two questions, actually. First, your event next Friday, is there a virtual option?
That is a great question. And I'm going to cheat and just peek on our website to get an answer for you very quickly. Give me just a moment. We have been shifting to doing, as we've been pulling things back in person, we've been shifting things to hybrid as well. So let me just see if this is going to be hybrid. Please hold, and I will actually drop, for folks who are checking this out online, I'm going to drop the link for this event. Let's see, can I send this to everyone? Yes, let's send this to everyone. I'm going to drop it in the chat for you all. And then let's see.
Two questions, right?
Yeah, my second question,
Yeah.
you know, with all the craziness with the states and opposing library books and teaching critical race theory, have you seen a pushback here in this area? Because I know there are pockets that we're starting to see that in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Good question. So I know that there have been some things taking place in different communities around Pennsylvania. What I can tell you is that at the museum, people are very excited about the diverse people and complex events that we are talking about as we uncover and share these stories about the revolution. We have heard from some teachers. We've been doing some of the annual meetings for different state councils for the social studies. We've been going to their conferences. And we did hear from some teachers in one state that they loved our resources, but they were terrified to use them because they were afraid that those resources would get them into trouble. And we've heard that in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be something
challenging
for them to even propose that to parents. We're going to take your kids here and show them this.
And it's, our exhibits are diverse in any number of different ways. So for us, diversity isn't just race and ethnicity, even though that's a piece of it, right? Language diversity is a piece of it, all of that. But also let's think about gender, let's think about place of origin, let's think about religion, let's think about social class, let's think about the types of work, let's think about geography of where people were living during the revolution, and all sorts of other life experiences. And so when people come here, it's not that they're only going to get like minority voices of the revolution or something like that. They're getting a full and broad story. So it's more things like we have an interactive called Finding Freedom that is both in our galleries and online. And it focuses on 5 people of African descent who were all living in Virginia in 1781. Now, people hear that description, people of African descent, Virginia, 1781, and they would assume, okay, all of these people had the same experience, but they didn't. And so the purpose of that digital interactive is actually to show all of the different kinds of, or many of the different kinds of experiences that people of African descent could have in that place, in that time, and the different choices that they could make with their lives. And we've built teacher resources around it, all sorts of stuff like that. But because it is specifically about people of African descent, and the climate is such in some places where they're afraid to really dig into stories that diverge from sort of the mainstream or European descended individuals. There is a fear among some teachers about bringing that into the classroom. One of our responses to that would be lean on the primary sources, because we make a lot of primary sources available. And when you do that, you can still tell a full story that includes many different voices, right? But you can ask lots of questions where you don't have to provide your own opinions, and it doesn't even have to seem like you're providing your own opinions. You're providing access to the words that people used in the 18th century to describe their and other people's experiences. You're pulling it straight from the 18th century.
Adrienne, earlier I said it would be great if we could look at the American Revolution and the museum through a set of glasses. Yvette, one lens had Black Lives Matter, the other lens had January 6th, and we look through them and see. It's a great opportunity for us. You know, my card says catalytic agent, and that's what I believe I do. So a great to introduce Stacie Blake and bring her into the conversation, because she's been delving in that question of the pushback, the feedback, and the public obligation, the personal obligation, and the corporate obligation of achieving diversity in this politicized climate. I'd like to say also that like our program, which was originally supposed to be in June of 2020, which was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment, we opened in the height of COVID and the chaos that came afterwards, which greatly changed both the citizenship and the sponsorship's attitudes about us. And so I asked Stacie to talk about her organization, which has a long historical consensus attitude about YMCA and YWCAs, the currency of her programs in relationship to the community that she's in, which is well known for its abolitionist and underground railroad, but is a contemporary city, Lancaster, and also the really dynamic work that she's doing, including the analysis of the climate for this kind of work. Welcome, Stacie Blake.
Thank you so much, Lenwood. I can't talk long. I got to jump on a train and get to Philly and go see Adrienne's museum because I've never been there.
Love it. Definitely come visit us. Oh, and I should say, for the person who asked if that event was going to be online as well, the answer is yes.
Yeah, great. I want to come back and ask you a couple of questions, but Stacie, tell us about your journey to Lancaster. How it's such a fascinating pathway that you took to your
Thank you, Lenwood. I am working now in Lancaster City as the CEO at the YWCA Lancaster, and I came here for one reason, and that was to work on our mission. Our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. And I just could not think of a better thing to be working on in 2019 than that. It's very simple for me. I came from Washington, D.C., where I had been working on federal refugee and immigrant policy, another critical issue that, to my dismay, remains unresolved today. But I personally wanted to get back into the community and see firsthand the results of my efforts. So I do get to see that every day. I work in a building that is home to over 50 individuals, women, men, and children. and many kids who come for childcare and survivors who come for support and counseling. So I definitely get a deep community feel every day.
Now, I want to linger on that for a moment because your historic building, which is on what we would lovingly refer to as Mansion Row, the how you know the original tenants of that building would be like passing out if they knew how diverse the people are that use that building. Would you talk about the housing piece, the food part, and the education and the school part?
You know, one thing I love about our building, it was opened in 1918, and then there was a pandemic, and they had to close briefly and then reopen. So for us, it's our second pandemic. One original purpose of our building was to provide housing for single young women who were coming from the countryside of Lancaster County into the city to work in these new jobs in manufacturing and some retail factories, which then were right downtown in Lancaster City. So they needed a safe, secure, supervised, all-female place to live. And that was part of our origin story. Remarkably, those exact same rooms, a single bed, a tiny closet designed for a 17 or 18-year-old young woman who probably owned 3 dresses and a pair of shoes, those same rooms are in use today, right in the same building, for single individuals who are very low income. Maybe they are living only on a disability check, a social security check, for homeless adults who bring 2, 3 children to live in that same small room with them for a short time as they transition from homelessness to stable housing. So that responsibility is so critical to understanding who we are and our role in the community.
And at the same time, you have an established preschool program with a really diverse community of residents, immigrants, and transients.
Yeah, the childcare program is interesting because it starts with providing drop-in care for women who were looking for something to do, coming to take an aerobics class. We have a large gym that was once open to the public. We once had the largest indoor swimming pool in the state of Pennsylvania in our building on the ground floor. So people were coming in, parents wanted to drop a child off. That was the origin of our childcare. Today, we have pre-K programs. Most of the children who come to our building are on subsidy, again, because their families are working and low income. So they just need a little help to pay that childcare.
Now, we came to Stacie, well, for many reasons, but one of those reasons was that Maud Coleman, whose name is on the monument, who was a facilitator and activist for registering women to vote in 1920, was also instrumental in Stacie's community. And we had discovered that archives that were at Millersville University. And thus we started a kind of group like our history detectives for Lancaster, which we lovingly refer to as the Mod Squad. And the Mod Squad was hunting Maud Coleman's impact on engaging women in the politics of race and the power of the vote. And you're still doing that work. Would you talk about that?
Her story is so inspiring, Lemwood, and I'll be forever grateful that you brought that story to life for me as a newcomer to town. And I was so inspired then in being part of the Mod Squad and doing my due diligence. I learned that because the building opened in 1918, at that time, of course, women did not have suffrage. And the good men of Lancaster County, when that was up for a vote later, voted against women having those rights. But ultimately, of course, women did earn those rights, white women primarily, in 1920. YWCA then began to hold classes in our library, which we still use actively today, to teach people how to vote. At that time, you did have to pay to register to vote in our county. And there was a discount rate if you were married. I think that's because maybe you would have someone to help you figure out what in the world to do with this new right you had. So our responsibility, our legacy includes registration for anyone to vote. And we do that today. Very proudly organized a group, particularly during COVID, to a group of local agencies to figure out how are we going to continue voter registration, which was kind of low, in my opinion. And we continue to work at it every election, right? Because we have an election coming up the end of May, a primary in Lancaster County. And this is something that it's just too often that folks aren't really thinking about this. It's not top of mind. But I really feel so strongly about everyone who is eligible to be able to have easier access to registering, getting your ballot, finding your place to vote. And we're going to continue that work 100%. I'm so happy to see Adrienne with the new citizen program at the museum, and some of our volunteers do also go to the citizenship ceremonies in Lancaster to make themselves available to register new citizens right when they get their papers.
Now, Stacie, I need to go backwards to go forwards here. So let's go backward to the fact that Pennsylvania was the 7th state in the Union to ratify the 19th Amendment. And we're really proud of that part. But Lancaster County voted against the 19th Amendment. You know, yes, and so embedded in the DNA of your county is the resistance to the work you're doing. And how do you negotiate that resistance?
Well, I have to say, that is something that core concern about what we're doing does continue literally today. And there have been questions by elected officials. Are we, quote, out of our lane when we engage in voter registration in Lancaster County? But I persist and believe that that is part of our origin story. And that is part of the responsibility of the good women in Lancaster who opened the YW and have passed on this great responsibility to me for the time I'm here to continue to do this work.
And part of that work is dealing with the issue of recidivism in prison, rights to vote. And would you talk a bit about that work?
I came of age in a different state, in the state of Vermont, where you are allowed to vote if you are if you're incarcerated. And it's just a very normal thing that happens and nobody thinks twice about it. Well, of course, there's really a different culture around that here. People do lose their rights. And we also are concerned in our county in particular around the use of bail for people who have been arrested and how many people are being held because they're poor and they can't make their bail payment. And so they're held in our county prison just down the street, not too far from YWCA. And it drives up our numbers. It puts people's lives in disarray. They can't go to work. They could lose their housing. They can lose their children. This is a question, not of diversity, a question of equity and justice that I see so much energy from the local power interfaith group, and that YW and other folks concerned with justice are going to continue to work on.
And we do need, because we're in a history setting, to remind us all to go back to 1792 amendment that said all citizens are free except if they have been arrested and their resolution is unresolved. This made picking up people for vagrancy, picking up people for minor cases enslaved, basically. And we are still practicing the same use. The prisons are the new plantations, you know, and 41 cents a week, you know, of which 26 of those cents go to your food account, doesn't allow you the right to come back. But you're doing some very interesting work with people who are re-entering the community. And would you talk about that?
Yes, so one of our programs is called New Choices, and it's literally a career development opportunity for anyone in transition. That often means transition from incarceration back to community, but it also can mean I want a new job. I'm getting divorced and I need to figure out how to support my family. So any kind of transition. And, you know, our role is to really support the individual. Where are they? How do they identify their skills, their aptitudes? What's their dream? And how can we make a plan to take one step and then the next step towards that new future? I would be remiss if I didn't invite you to join us next Friday night. That program in particular, and some of the graduates are part of an opportunity we call Taste of Success. And it's actually our best event, partly because it has the best food, because culinary students have a showdown where they make their best creation, and your obligation as a guest is to try everything so you can make an informed vote about your favorite item that has been prepared. So it's a wonderful mix of supporting the good work of our program and getting people back on their feet, supporting students who are so excited with this competition of using their culinary skills. And last year, a couple of those students had come through our program and their passion was cooking. And so we were able to support them to enroll in a skill-based program like that and really see them take off. It's so great.
You're about 4 blocks away from the Thaddeus Stevens and Lydia Hamilton Smith house, which is going through a reconstruction to become the Thaddeus Stevens and Lydia Hamilton Smith Center for the Discovery of Democracy. A place where we have to go back and rediscover the notion of democracy. And one of the things we are discovering about Thaddeus Stevens is his disability. We don't think of Thaddeus Stevens as a person who was disabled, but he was, and therefore Lydia Hamilton Smith was a care partner. And through his writing of the 13th and 14th Amendment, and a lot of the work he started on the 15th Amendment, she was literally there supporting him for his achievement. I know that you have programs in-house for the disabled, and you have some residents who are doing some really incredible work to bring full equity and parity to physically challenged people.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on this equity question since you gave that opening, Lenwood. And you know, the access for folks with disabilities is so critical. Most of the residents who live with us live here because we have a small elevator, and they use a chair or they use a walker, and they just actually cannot find another place to live that's accessible for them. So it really is critically important. On this question of equity, one of our most recent projects has been to produce, with some partners in the community, an equity profile of our entire county. And this profile is looking at demographics and geography and rent and justice and transportation, because we really wanted to understand a place like Lancaster County, known for a brand of being welcoming and so calm and, you know, pastoral and diverse in the city. But also it's a place that's very hard for some people to live. So the equity profile shows us exactly where those inequities are showing up so that we can now work on the right problems, not just work generally on what we think might be good.
Now, Lancaster is, and forgive me, Stacie, I've lost the term right now, a sanctuary city
Hmm.
in title, but in fact, it has a big challenge with immigrants and refugees impacting the streets, the situation of homelessness, policing. And so the philosophy, I always make this distinction, sir, between the two documents that we have our feet on. One foot is on the Declaration of Independence, which is a mission statement, which is a manifesto, which is the dream of our possibility, which is a hope of what we want to achieve. And the other foot is on the Constitution, which is the contract of who is in and who is not, you know, and we get imbalanced with that. And so Lancaster calls itself a sanctuary city, but has a really hard time with the notion of both immigrants who come there by choice and refugees who are seeking prompt secure. And
Lenwood, you're right, but also the families who are Black and brown, who have lived there for generations, but have not benefited in the same ways that white families living in the same neighborhoods, the same townships have benefited. And I feel that it's just so important to name this and use good language that also points out inequities that aren't strictly based on race. And I think Adrienne, touched on this too. There's many stories in our county. There's many stories of poverty in our county, of people in rural areas. That's also not okay. And those kids don't have access to the rich information and libraries and opportunities and all the things to help grow strong citizens. But it's more than that. It's also inequities that are based on race that we really can address.
So Stacie, tell us about the report and what were some of its top line findings?
Yes. So the report was prepared by an outside institution called Policy Link. They're the professionals. This is what they do. A couple of the headlines from the report. Oh, here, I think I forgot that I could share. I'll just show you. Anyone can look at this report anytime. It's at equityprofilelancaster.com. So this is only a microsite, so the site's only about the report. And here you see the kinds of things that are covered: demographics, economics, health, justice. This is one graph in the report. So this is talking about who lives in our county, how this has changed over time, and how then it would be projected to change. And of course, this is very important when you think about who will be the students in the future, who will be the workers in the future, who will be the customers in the future. So this is one of the most important slides to me, is just understanding who lives here.
And my challenge with this, Susan, is that the math doesn't reflect the impact of the people. You know, you may have a very small percentage of people, but their culture, their language, and their mores impact the.
I'll show you another finding that's just so troubling. So this is, to me, a reflection on both where we've been historically, but what's happening today. So this is a graph that's telling us only in Lancaster County, if you are a person of color, at any educational level, you can expect to be paid $3 to $5 less an hour than if you are white.
At any educational level.
Right, which belies what we were told, which is if you get more education, you will earn more. Well, you will, but you'll never earn as much. And of course, you compound this over, one day, 1 week, a lifetime of earnings.
And generational
Yes,
impacts,
yes. So I can share that this slide in particular, a couple of CEOs in our county who have seen this presentation, who are good people, who believe that Lancaster is a fair and welcoming place, went back to their HR departments and asked for the data and then shared it with me to let me know that their data also looked like this.
Mm.
So it feels very real. And I'll share just one more important slide. In part because of those pay inequities, look who's living in poverty. So this is children in poverty. In our county, 1/3 of the children of color are living in poverty. And this is really just not a sustainable model for success for the future.
And it's just, yes. And when you put 67 counties together, you get really a challenge for our museums, our schools, our churches, to become learning places. And when I say learning, I mean lifelong learning places, because you can't achieve the American dream. This is not the Declaration of Independence. This is the contract. This is who's in the contract, in the Constitution.
Right.
I have been saying, and Stacie, I say this every chance I get, that this is where I came in the movie. I was a young, politicized person who believed that and affirmed that I would see this change in my lifetime. Now at 76 years old, I am realizing that it's going to be, let the word go forth from this time and place to friends and foes alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation. And that new generation of 18-year-old or 25-year-olds, the statistics show that they do not vote until the end of that margin. They have the right to vote at 18. They don't begin to enter the civic conversation till 25. And what a change that demographic could make, So how do you use this information, and how do you get up in the morning and still want to go to work? And how do you make this yeast?
Listen, I'll just tell you, my day started greeting the preschoolers coming in the door at YWCA, and to see their smiling faces skipping in, that's the secret sauce, right? How the report's being used, it was published in January. There were about 8 agencies involved in creating this. Each agency has used it a little differently. I have wanted to share it far and wide. Actually, tonight, a group of people are gathering at YWCA who want to move to action. And, we've identified a couple of initiatives in our county that are already underway that directly impact some of the inequities that are highlighted in the report. And we really want to put more energy into those. We don't need to create something new when there's already folks working on a couple of these big problems.
Great. Here's the part in the program where we bring Adrienne back. I'll disappear, and Adrienne and Stacie get an opportunity to have a conversation with each other, either affirmations, confirmations, altar calls, wailing walls. The two of you get to ask each other questions or make commonality, the place where your two approaches come together. So take it away, ladies.
Oh boy, that's exciting. Didn't know I was going to have this opportunity, Stacie.
I know. And Adrienne, one thing that comes to mind right away is I perceive us both as truth tellers.
Yes.
You are telling stories that may have slipped from our fingers and been lost.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to tell a story of what I see right in front of us.
Yes, yes. And the two of them impact each other, right? Because the more that people know about the past, hopefully the better that we could do in the present. And hopefully we're using tools in the present to help more people to learn about the past.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
together, those two roads should hopefully lead us to a better place as a nation.
Right. Right. And you know, one reason that this profile came to be is that after George Floyd was murdered, there were people in our community saying, this is the kind of thing we've been talking about. This is the kind of problem that keeps happening. And then there were other people saying, I don't know what you're talking about. We have a wonderful county. Everyone's so nice. And so that gap of information was, you know, a Grand Canyon. And I know that you know, see that daily of people you even mentioned saying, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I learn this?
Yes, I mean, we only know as much as what's in front of us and what we know to seek out, right? And
Mhm.
so if an issue is not placed directly in front of us, if that fact isn't readily available and we don't know to go look for it, right? We don't know what we don't know. And so
Mhm.
people speak from their own experiences. That's why I think both of us are doing what we're doing, is because we have access to more information. And the more people who know what we know, hopefully it's going to be used for good and not for evil, right? Hopefully we make the positive change.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me that's kind of brought both pieces that I spoke on this evening together, the profile, the poverty, the inequity, but also YWCA are building and being a home for people. I spoke to a resident this week, and in our conversation, she mentioned that at a different point, her daughter and grandchild had also lived with us.
Mm.
Wow.
And the idea that 3 generations of one family
Mhm.
has been so unstable in their housing related to poverty, inequity, not being paid enough, all of the things just made it even more real for me.
Land,
Yeah, that
land,
is.
jobs, and housing. We're still trying to get that equilateral triangle balanced.
Yes.
Mhm.
Then you can
Yes.
begin to talk about citizenship and franchise. When you have a roof and a pork chop in your stomach, you know, and, you know,
Mhm.
and a job, then you can begin to
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, Lenwood, is basically Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mhm.
right? Like you
Right.
can't start to think about certain things until you are stable, secure, and safe.
Yeah.
But of course, the challenge is, how do you ensure that you are stable, secure, and safe when your voice hasn't been heard in maneuvering the political processes that open the doors to make that happen?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a cycle, which is why we need allies and co-conspirators. So I've heard people using that word,
Oh yeah.
co-conspirators. And I'm like, yes, it's not just about allyship, it's about people who are actively in the struggle, planning with you and coming up with those ideas and supporting you.
So
Yeah.
I heard a friend describe co-conspirators the best way for me the other day. They gave the example of you are, let's imagine New York City, and you're trying to get a cab. And so the white person, that would be me, sees that a person of color is trying to get a cab and the cab is not stopping. And so I put my arm up and the cab stops for me. One thing I can do is say, oh, actually, it was this other person's turn. And so I want them to have the cab. But really, a co-conspirator then writes down the license plate of the cab, calls the cab company, and
Amen.
says, hey, this cab did not treat everyone fairly and didn't stop to pick up the other. So I love that example of it's not enough to just step aside and let someone have a turn. It's also to work on the system.
Yes.
Absolutely.
To increase by ceasing that practice. This is really wonderful. So there is a board of directors of the Dauphin County Library System that has chosen to take a wing of their expanded library and create a center for the exploration of the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendment.
Wow.
And we here at the center are trying to impact people, particularly about the 14th Amendment, that so many of the justice issues of the gay and lesbian community, of women's rights to their body, are impounded in Article 3 of the 14th Amendment. And so the 14th Amendment is just not about Black folks. It's about our rights, and we have to all embrace this struggle. In our 15th Amendment is the unfinished business, which results in the 19th Amendment. But the 19th Amendment also comes at a time when Woodrow Wilson is segregating the White House and bringing colored sign only. It also comes at a time of the most intense Jim Crow. James Reese Yorp and his Black soldiers come home and march down New York streets to discover segregation. So legislation and administration don't line up, and what we have here is Adrienne creating a treasure chest for the legislation, which could empower the dream, and Stacie creating an army of people willing to go out on the street and make sure the dream comes true. In the board you have allies, and I hope that through Mark Smith and in the chat room you have allies. So I hope you all put into your chats your addresses so that not only the Chester Center can connect with you, but our guests can connect with you also. In April, we will look at the issue of the impact of COVID on the gig economy. And we will look at Michael Ciappelloni from the tourism industry. We'll look at Keisha Finney, a independent visual artist, Jen DeFaro from the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. We'll talk about the impact of the cottage industry of culture and history, and Kim Chan from not Americans for the Arts, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation. We'll talk about the Sawdust Project. She'll also talk, Stacie, with John Gertie from Lancaster Music for Everybody, an exciting program that puts pianos out on the street from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and has just started a program, Adrienne, where they're sending solo artists into the living rooms of senior citizens who are homebound to play concerts for them. They're also buying instruments for people who lost their instruments. And so we'll talk about those people who are gig artists and gig laborers, and what is the crises of being, we fill out that 1099 sole proprietor, and what that means, and what are some of the support and services. That is April 20th. You can go to Dauphin County Live, dcls.org, and click on to live and learn and see all the programs that we've had. We invite you especially to look at the program last year, which was called Black and White and Green in Harrisburg, and looked at Black and Irish relationships in Harrisburg. Have a great, safe St. Patrick's Day. Those of you who also celebrate St. Joseph's Day, give food to the poor, share your blessings, and we hope to see you all on April 20th on Animating Democracy.